Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Very warm welcome to our webinar on the resilience of services in times of trade uncertainty. As many of you know, there's been a great deal of upheaval globally over the last couple of weeks regarding tariffs. And we brought this webinar together to act as perhaps an incentive to think about other ways to counter some of these trade tariffs that may be applied. We are part of the Advanced Services Group, Aston Business School. We focus particularly on adding services to support products in use. And we've been very fortunate to be able to bring together an experienced panel for today's webinar to talk about their experiences from both an economic perspective, but also from a business perspective in terms of the role that services might play in times of uncertainty. So we'll just pick up a little bit about the context of these changing tariffs on products across global borders, the role of services to support resilience, and then we'll introduce the panel, and then we'll have the conversations with the panelists about some of the key points that we think are relevant to you and your businesses. So I've introduced myself. We have Alec Anderson with us today. Alec is the founder and managing director of Koolmill Solutions, and I'm very pleased to say he's also a senior industrial fellow with Aston Business School. We also have Evans OBE. Des was the former CEO of MAN Truck and Bus in the UK, and again delighted that he is an honorary professor with the Advanced Services Group at Aston Business School. We've got Professor June Du, who's a professor of economics at the Business School at Aston. And finally, we have Paul Jennings, the former CEO of JCB Finance. And again, I'm delighted to add that Paul is an honorary professor within the Advanced Services Group at Aston Business School. So the context, what we're talking about today. We've got some changing tariffs that have happened on products across global borders in recent weeks. I think I've simplified here by just sharing a snapshot of what some of these might look like. We've got significant market instability, fluctuating markets, currencies, commodity prices, perhaps a drop in risk appetite. We've got trade tensions and tit-for-tat retaliations. We're just not sure where that might lead and when it might stop. The economic impact is significant to the disruption to supply chains, but more importantly, for all of us involved in the webinar, the added cost as consumers. We know that there's an implication on gross domestic product. It's very difficult to be more productive and sell more products when tariffs act as a barrier. And we have policy uncertainty, the frequent changes and reversals of policies at short notice either stifle or cancel investments or potential future investments. So this erratic nature of trade policies and perhaps the far-reaching consequences is why we brought this group together today. So I'm going to open the session by just having a general panel discussion, talking about the role of services to support resilience. And June, if I may, I'd like to bring you in on the first question about the volatility of trade. We know that global trade is increasingly characterized by volatility, where these tariffs and trade tensions are becoming a significant factor in business. So what businesses, I think, need are strategies to navigate this uncertainty. How might they go about that?
Hi, everybody. Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes, June, thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Iain, for the very nice introduction. And I'm really glad to be here. I think it's really timely. So may I congratulate you for organizing such a timely discussion at this critical time. Exactly as you said, Iain, trade has become really structurally more volatile. And it's not just because of Trump 2.0. So what we saw during the Trump administration in the last few weeks, actually, the imposition of sudden tariffs was really an isolated episode. It's just more acute. It is rather a kind of a symptomatic of a broad trend of trend of trade, global trade towards geopolitically driven trade policy. Add to that the Brexit, the pandemic, and increasingly regulatory divergence between used to be aligned countries, the resulting trade environment where uncertainty is no longer really a short-term shock, but a persistent feature. For UK businesses, especially the small ones, small and medium enterprises, this clearly poses a real challenges. Traditional trade models building on basically the transactions as we used to embrace. So this is more stable in rules, and supply chain are more fixed and predictable. That is no longer to hold. To navigate this, firms really increasingly need to require somewhat towards resilient strategy, although that's not a very clear strategy, and there's no specific playbook how that might look like. And servitization could be one of the ways and one of the toolboxes the companies can think about. So that means essentially by bundling the products with services, whether that's digital monitoring, maintenance, training, or consultancy, firms can potentially reduce reliance on physical flows, more closer to customers, and maintain presence in overseas markets, even when goods are disrupted for whatever reasons. So services are less exposed to tariffs, as we all know, and is potentially more adaptable to regulatory changes and better suited for long-term value creation. I guess that's where Advanced Service Group is really renowned for, and that's where we are here to discuss. But of course, it's not just a rosy and optimistic picture, because trade policies traditionally has not really focused on the introduction between the two. So in this sense, the trade policy globally needs to catch up. Servitized exports face fragmented regimes, goods under one set of rule, services under another. Generally, the trade liberalization is more the case for goods rather than services. Services liberalization generally is very difficult. So the integration is extremely limited between the two. Therefore, to support resilience, the industry bodies and the thinking body, and also the policymakers really need to think about, work together and think about the ways to evolve to promote cross-border services, digital trade, and rental services, essentially, and professional mobility, which is very important from the human capital perspective. Without this, even the more adaptable firms will struggle with the resilience models globally. So in short, volatility is a new normal. It's not going to go away. Businesses must rethink what they export and how and where, and policymakers must rethink how to support them. Sometimes innovation is very needed. And therefore, through the more coherent, forward-looking, future-proof trade architecture that aligns with modern business models.
Lovely. Thank you, Jen. And that's very insightful in terms of the fact that it's not just a shock over the last 2 or 3 weeks. These are trends that you've been picking up underlying that. So let me go to Paul now. And Paul, perhaps we recognise the impact that these tariffs have on product-based businesses. Traditional businesses are now exposed to tariffs, leading to increased costs, disruptive supply chains, and perhaps even leading to reduced competitiveness. So in your experience with JCB, what role perhaps could services play in this new landscape?
Well, thanks for that, Ian. And I just refer back to John's terminology of volatility. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a time like it in my 50 years in business. But not everyone is exposed to tariffs. But those that are, it's what are they? When are they going to apply? Which goods are they going to affect? And who are they going to affect? Given the various trade deals that we're saying are happening in the background. So it's a very mixed picture, but obviously it is not business as usual. I'd like to start by just talking about reduced competitiveness away from the States, really. What are the exporters? A good portion are from low-cost manufacturing bases. What are they going to do which markets are they going to seek out with their products as they realise that it's going to be more difficult to get into the US, which will be probably their bigger market. So how do domestic businesses in the UK and other countries defend themselves? What are those defensive tactics? They're already facing competitive challenges within their business. It's difficult to run a business in a domestic country nowadays. And of course, you've got net zero obligations to meet too. And what are the chances that indigenous manufacturers are going to be able to out-discount low-cost suppliers? What are the countermeasures that are needed there? So I think that's one of the big issues beyond the nature and extent of tariffs in the US. We mustn't forget, and I'm sure many on the line today are not forgetting at all, about the possibility of increased competitiveness in their own market, regardless of how competitive they appear if they're exporting to the US. You mentioned increased costs. There are some things, JCB, for instance, I don't work there now. I certainly follow what they do and can't speak for them. But JCB are opening the second factory in Texas. It's under construction now. JCB have been manufacturing in the US for 40 or 50 years, but they now have two factories, one in Savannah, the second one being built in Texas, and they're doubling the floor space of that from 500,000 square feet to 1 million, and will be making more machines in the US in months and years to come. But as far as increased cost goes, maybe if we're not in the States and we're elsewhere, we could think about the raw materials costs, and other materials might suffer from deflation rather than increasing in costs, because demand may well fall in the States. Demand may well fall in low-cost production centres. So in the short term, are we going to see deflation rather than inflation? But on the other side of the pond in America, with Trump's reshoring initiative going to encounter drag, and it takes a while to build factories, to build semiconductors or whatever. And even if they manage to have rapid build-up of US-based manufacturing, I don't think they'll ever reach the price points, the consumer price points that consumers have been used to in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Incidentally, a poll was conducted the other day amongst American people. 70% of those polled said that they thought it was a good idea to reshore automotive jobs into the US. But the same percentage also said they wouldn't like to work at an automotive plant. So there's quite a paradox there. But I do see inflation being prolonged and possibly becoming a contagion, more or less along the same lines as the oil shock in 1973, which saw incredible inflation begin to appear in the Western world. So there's a paradox between deflation and inflation. As far as disruptive power, supply chains, in 2021, we had one ship jam the Suez Canal, and it was pandemonium. That was one ship. Likewise, there was a fire in Japan in a chip factory, semiconductor factory, and automotive businesses globally felt the heat from that problem. And then COVID was the granddaddy of all supply chain difficulties. But I do think that the trade war that's going on at the moment could make the granddaddy of them all, COVID, look like a picnic in the park. So there are some real concerns that we can no doubt all see there.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's quite a wide-ranging response there. And I think there's elements there that we need to understand how to be more resilient. So, Alec, perhaps if I could bring you in to talk about the resilience of services from your perspective. We know that there's the rise of digital technologies which enable a seamless delivery of services across borders, perhaps further reducing their vulnerability to tariffs and trade barriers. Maybe before we start, could you just give a quick summary of Koolmill and what Koolmill do, Alec, please? I think many people on the webinar will know about JCB and they will know about MAN, but perhaps Koolmill, if you could just do a quick summary and then tell us how you've exploited your opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, we're significantly smaller than JCB, that's for sure. We've developed a unique technology that's very efficient in the way it processes rice. It's the #1 cash crop in the world. It feeds 3.5 billion people each day. So it's a very significant global industry. It's a very traditional industry where they sell machines and boxes. It's a transactional business. And that's very well established over many, many years. So we have a disruptive technology, which makes it an interesting challenge to get into the business because, there's the technical risk, there's cost, the CapEx, if you like. And so services really offers us the opportunity to access a wider range of customers, not just the high-end customers who have the access to the finance to purchase machines. But more importantly, so it does risk mitigation for the customer. It avoids necessity of CapEx particularly for the smaller customers. It gives them cost certainty, but it also gives us the opportunity to capture a fair share of the value that we can create.
Yeah.
And I suppose the challenge for us is, are we the machinery that we manufacture, or do we manufacture? Are we just a provider of machinery and the services of the income generation? It's quite a philosophical discussion, that one. But fundamentally, I think where the digitalization is significant is that our model is very much based on the Rolls-Royce power by the hour. So we have to be able to manage, monitor, and intervene when things start to go wrong. We're in penalties if the machines are not running. So it's really important that we can capture data live from the machines, and we can understand what's happening at any given time. And as I say, we can intervene at an early stage to avoid unnecessary downtime. There's significant revenue potential from the services compared to the transactional traditional model. If you think about it in the context of where we're speaking today and tariffs, if I'm sending a machine into a cross-border and there's a tariff applied, then the tariff's going to be applied on the retail price that I'm charging that end user. If we have a services model, then we can move that machine potentially in a more efficient manner intercompany, and the main revenue potential is coming from the services generation, not the sale of the machine. But more significantly, I think in terms of bearing in mind this is a recurring monthly service fee based on the value that we create. As we grow the user base, it becomes a much smoother predictable cash flow, in that very quickly the recurring revenue dwarfs the capital revenue or the tariff, the revenues that are subject to tariff or costs that are coming from the tariffs. So it gives you that opportunity to have a more predictable, manageable business, given the volatility and uncertainty of the world which we live in today.
Okay, thanks, Alec. And perhaps that's a really good time to bring Des in, because Des, with having your tenure as CEO of MAN Truck and Bus in the UK, your line that I recall was that it took you 10 years to become an overnight sensation. Could you maybe give us just a sense of what you did to embrace service-based business models and how that positioned you to thrive in an era of trade uncertainty?
Okay. Well, I think, first of all, the question that's being posed today, the resilience of services, I think it's the resilience of organizations that's being tested. And that resilience will be determined by how adjusted organizations are to integrating added value services into the product, as opposed to just selling the product on its own. And I think this issue with tariffs, it focuses too much on the price and not enough on the value. And the example that I can give you is that when we launched a new product back in 2004, so I'm going back 20 years now, one of the questions that we asked ourselves was, what would happen to this product if the market suddenly collapsed? That if we couldn't sell a truck for 6 months, how could we survive? So we actually introduced in 2004 a new service package, which was based upon the new telematic capability, where is a AAA concept where we put 3 years servicing, 3 years financing, and 3 years fleet management in a package. And between 2004 and 2008, we actually developed or created a 15,000 contract portfolio that generated an annual income of 60 million with a 54-month life, 4.5 years life. So a 270 million pound forward order bank, yeah, for services, which had a margin that was 10 times better than selling one truck. Yeah. It was the equivalent of selling 4,500 trucks. And guess what happened? In 2008, we had the financial crash, and the truck market in the UK collapsed from 45,000 units to 27,000 units. Our volumes went from 5,000 units a year to they halved, under 2,500. So the exact scenario that we had pictured 4 years earlier actually happened. And without the service organization that we had created, I doubt very much whether we would have survived. Additionally, in 2007, we also managed to start the order for the MOD, which gave us a 2 billion forward order for 7,415 military vehicles, which was just amazing. And that took us through to 2010, 2012, 30 million a month just in vehicle sales. But the combination of services, without the services, we probably would not have survived. But I think that is the measure of what's happening in the world today. And I think this tariff thing is really going to have a massive impact on how the world operates. And I think we are now going to see possibly a silent digital revolution into how trade is conducted. And one of my big wishes is that if you take the top 33 companies and countries in the world, including China and Japan, they have a GDP of 52 trillion, 40% more than the US. And I think it's a time now where the US could be isolated and the new Euro-Asian community, free trade, no tariffs, including China, could be formed that would completely isolate the US and put this whole tariff issue to bed, because it's a complete nonsense in my view. Free trade with collaborative and cooperative organizations and countries, collaboration is the future, not competition. And services will be at the absolute, they will be the pioneer of a new order of things, in my opinion.
Okay. Des, that was really helpful. June, perhaps I could tee you up to think about Des's response there, and if I can maybe go back to Paul quickly, and then I'll come back to you in terms of the response to that. Paul, we see products and services being bundled together, looking at the installation and the maintenance and the training. Any advice or insights you would want to share with the panel?
Well, this is really the crux of what we've all been talking about. It is a moment, a pivot of change of direction. It's a rallying call to adopt services in a far more deep sense within manufacturers' selling operations, the standard sales process, in order to defend against those low-cost goods that are going to be coming our way, and also to grow. So it's that fulcrum of switching between product-led to overall solutions-led and outcomes-led philosophy with customers. Telematics, it's been mentioned. I think organizations have got to review where they're at with telematics right now, and what are the plans to further exploit telematics what extra value services can be derived from those telematics. But furthermore, consider where the data is held. Where is the data? Are there, if it's in the US, are there potentially some further restrictions or tariffs on data that is held in the US, or future restrictions on US companies being free and easy with releasing data? So I don't know whether that's off the wall or not, but it's one worth doing a risk assessment about. And service skills, field service skills. What is your state of provision of field service? What is your recruitment, your training, your retention, both internally and externally on the training side of things, and selling the whole package. Companies around the world, they do a great job usually of design, manufacturing, research, aftercare, sales and service, but sometimes it strikes me that they miss something out, and that's the funding thing that they leave the customer with, to just do battle with themselves to find out who can provide them with finance. And my evidence that I can bring to court is that manufacturers need a trustworthy, dedicated funder working alongside them in the various markets that they serve. So I suppose to discover who can help, how they can help, where they can help, I can't think of a better place than, in my experience, than the Advanced Services Group. So that's my plug for you today, Iain. I do think it's about bundling products and services and finance together to create something that then provides the customer with an extended value proposition rather than product orientation.
Lovely, thank you, Paul. And Paul, I'm mindful that you perhaps have a hard stop today, so thank you if you're not able to hang on, but otherwise, please.
As long as I can, yes.
Yeah, thank you. June, so Des raised an interesting point there about this opportunity to perhaps strengthen EU, Asian enterprise and economic activities. How would you respond to that?
I actually entirely agree, for various reasons. As we have seen in the last week or so, I think the media has now turned into reflecting on what's happening to what's going to happen next. And one of the outcome of this continuing trade war is that both countries, China and US, will be damaged somehow. And although China has been, quite strong and in retaliation, I think one fact which can't be denied is that the goods designated for US have to find alternative ways. I think currently the media has mainly focused on the potential threat of the cheap Chinese good coming as a trade diversion, and what does that mean for local producers? And I think EU and the UK are thinking of the measures to prevent that. Well, I think a couple of points to make. I think it is not really discussed the opportunities from it. I think I'm Chinese. We always believe that every threat, the opposite side is opportunities. So if you think about Chinese goods coming out of China to US, there are different types. There are cheap consumer goods and t-shirts and jeans, but equally there are green goods, net zero transition necessities, which are used to be backed by the state, but now it's coming to the stage where things are very cheap. It can help companies upgrade. And at the same time, there are high-tech goods which could potentially be an opportunity for other places. The second, I think opportunities should be explored. The second point is that while we are thinking of the potential opportunities for UK businesses, in thinking of combining the services to goods to enlarge the market opportunities, I'm pretty sure we're not alone. So Chinese companies have been trying to find the next value point in the last 10 years since the first trade war between China and US. So by migrating business to different places, including Southeast Asia and some other places in Latin America countries, this thinking of how do you actually produce the goods in different places, but still maintain your stake and maintaining the potential to gain from this business has been kind of very prosperous. So I've been reading stuff. So in the servitization side of thing, in the Southeast Asian and in China as well as Japan, this is something that is very live and very active in the innovation space. So in the way that now China has to find different ways to really continue their competitiveness, I think there are a lot of opportunities. Now, if you look at the statistics of UK trade, the potential growth area in the last few years, and you'll be surprised. Of course, EU is still the largest trade partner of UK, and now I think we're about 45% of market share still within the EU. But if you look at the growth of exports, China is by far the largest growth area. So it's potential to sell goods over there. So there will be potential to bundle with services. And then apart from China, the Middle East is potentially an interesting country to think about to offer services. And I think it's widely predicted the future growth in the next 10, 20 years. The high growth area are in the Southeast. And there's huge demand in upgrading, in scaling up, but at the same time, China is really good at producing, stuff in scale. But in terms of the specific tailored services and high-end, especially for high-end advanced manufacturing stuff, it doesn't have the capacity and hasn't been accumulated enough to offer the specific services. I think that's where UK has huge advantages. So I guess it's a long-winded way to say there are a lot of opportunities to collaborate with the Southeast Asian and the Middle East and potential India, as especially the government has already taken the first step to deepen the relationship through CPTPP with other countries, as well as trying to push a deal with India.
Can I come in there, Iain?
Of course, Des, of course.
What Gina's just explained there is so important, because if you look at what Trump and his acolytes are talking about, and if you take Ukraine and Russia, they're talking about the demand or the requirement for rare earths, right? And the battle of Canada and Greenland with the US. Now, if this new alliance between China, Europe, UK, and several other countries like Japan, like Canada, like Australia, they have then got control over vast quantities of the rare earth, the new rare earth, nickel and zinc, not cobalt and lithium, nickel and zinc, because that's why Trump wants to take over Greenland and Canada, because nickel and zinc will be the components of solid state batteries, which is the VHS versus the Betamax of lithium ion. Now, if you then look at further alliances with China have won the battery arms race. 70%, probably more now, of the world's batteries for electric vehicles are produced in China. Nothing is produced in the UK. And there are only 6 sites. There's 110 in China. There's 6 in Europe. Now, if we really collaborated with them, you could have companies like BYD, NIO, Geely, Chinese companies with vast automotive experience investing here in the UK, in Europe, using their commodities, such as the battery technology, but with UK and European services, it would be an absolute game changer. It'd be an absolute world beater. On top of that, you then really start to manage the energy supplies better. You can also get to grips with the climate change in terms of all the wind and solar that are coming from China. And then on top of that, the UK and the Europeans can provide the financial services and all the data management services which we're good at here. It's a perfect recipe for future success, for future peace, and for future prosperity. So in my book, globalization has been good. Globalization isn't dead. Globalization needs to continue, but on a service-led basis that includes some products along the way, not the other way around.
Yeah, That's a fabulous response, Des, and the role of services led is key strategically. So
totally, absolutely. Well, put it like this. If you look at the world GDP, right, it's about 106 trillion. Yeah. Unfortunately, 30 trillion of that happens to be with the Americans. But if you look at the world GDP, 64% is services. 64% is services. And if you look at services in the US, 76.4% of the US GDP is services, only 10% is manufacturing. That's where Trump's thinking, we've got to restore manufacturing. But no, it's the wrong way round. You cannot turn the clock back. Yeah, you've got to have this collaborative, trusted cooperation. If you want to bring about world peace and reduce all the conflicts, then use the technology and use the channel of services to do it, because that brings you together.
Right. Well, Des, that's a really good link into Alec, because Alec has been doing that for a number of years, obviously with China and India and Africa. Alec, how would you suggest, we're talking about mitigations here that we should be considering. How would you suggest that we explore the opportunities to integrate services into kind of product operations, think about developing new service-based offerings? How would you start, or how would you recommend?
The thing is an interesting challenge that Ian, we've all been brought up on a diet of cost reduction. Everybody wants to negotiate a deal. Mr. Trump's the deal maker and king, isn't he? So I think we need to change the narrative. It's like Des says, we need to change the narrative away from cost reduction to value creation.
Exactly.
How can we work together to create more value? I think there's a number of aspects. If you're going to look at moving away from a product bulk shifter to a services-driven organization, you have to think about, do you understand your customer? What is your value that you are bringing to that customer? Does your advanced services fit within their market? There's cultural issues to consider. People in my business like to own lumps of steel, even if that lump of steel is destroying their profit margins on a daily basis. You seem to have some comfort in that ownership. So there's a cultural shift that's required, as well as a technical shift. You look at the geopolitical situation that we have right now. For instance, America is an attractive market for us, but we choose not to work there for a variety of reasons. That's pre-Trump as well. It's even more so. So there are other places where we can work more easily. I think, as June mentioned, the free trade agreements, we would love the Indian free trade agreement to be finally signed, because that would make our business much, much easier. India is one of our key markets. So I think if you were looking to move into services away from product, you've got to ask the question, right? So what services can I offer? What value can I bring to my customer? And probably the most fundamental thing is, how can I capture and repatriate my share of the value I'm creating for my end user? But fundamentally, if you don't understand how your customer uses your product and the value you create for them, then it becomes quite a challenge.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got history, Alec, with understanding your growth of Koolmill and the awards, etc., that you've secured. June, is there anything that you would suggest from an economic perspective that Alec looked at in terms of being able to add even more value? Anything that the tariff challenges might bring an opportunity for him?
I think we tend to consider trade and investment separately, but we all know trade and investment are not really separate, especially when you consider services. Now, of course, we're considering product and services bundled together, which are more applicable for manufacturings and for many small and medium enterprises. Of course, large businesses are doing exceptionally well, but for many service providers, they are multinationals. I think one of the dynamics that we don't really grasp very well at the moment, and it's very hard to predict, is how does investment will flow. Because if we think about large multinationals, let's take automotive, sectors, for example. We don't really know how the investment will flow. UK automotive industries is largely foreign, and they are here to serve a purpose. All the multinational, investment are serving one of the four purposes. Either it's market seeking, either it's efficiency seeking, or strategic asset seeking. Maybe they are looking for some specific critical material, or some other R&D purposes. And automotive industries in the UK, they are responsible for a lot of supply chains and a lot of UK businesses in that supply chain, and how they would act next, and whether increased investment, which is almost certain in the US, especially the ones which are already invested a lot, which are probably under pressure from Japan for non-economic reasons, would mean that their purposes in the UK may be restricted or diminished to just serving the market with minimum investment in other functions. And what does that mean for the businesses, especially UK business and small business in that supply chain? I think that is uncertain. So I think it's almost urgent to think about this from this business perspectives, what can be done. So in my center, I lead a Center for Business Prosperity at Aston. So we have been looking into EV battery supply chain globally. And one of the interesting phenomena we have looked into is basically the supply chain setup of automotive industries in different countries. And what we found empirically is that when we compare UK and German businesses in automotive industries, especially the supplier, the tier 1, tier 2, you would find the German suppliers supply everybody. They supply German companies, they supply UK and France and US and China. And in fact, a lot of Chinese automotive industries, they use the material, especially the crucial parts from Germany. But then if you look at UK ones, most of them are living upon JLR or Nissan. So I feel that is a huge threat. So we know most likely the automotive industry in the UK will have to transform into something completely different.
Absolutely.
So therefore, it is really urgent to think from this perspective, from these small business, the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, what else they can do, who else they can supply, how can they expand and reconfigure their supply chains now that you really become urgent to think, and use this opportunity to explore alternative markets and what else can offer.
That's fabulous.
Iain, can I just come back on what Jun just said about, you just mentioned EV batteries as an example of where massive change can happen for the future. Yeah, we have 40 million vehicles in the UK, and by 2040, they're all supposed to become electric. It's a massive opportunity. There's 1.4 billion vehicles on the planet, and there's 100 million produced every year. Over the next 20, 30 years, electricity or electric vehicles are going to form a big part of that. But here's the thing. It's called the 3 R's. Yeah, the 3 R's for future services. And this is where there will be big opportunities, providing you have a collaborative and cooperative alliance. It's recycling, remanufacturing, and remarketing. And the remarketing will rely very much on advanced services to make the communications, to help manage the recycling in the first place, to develop the remanufacturing. And this is about using existing resources. You don't have to go and remine everything. So those 3 things are key to the future of electric vehicle battery production. And I think there are massive opportunities. But you've got to stop this nonsense with tariffs. You've got to have a collaborative alliance, and it's got to be a free trade alliance.
And I think in terms of timing, Des, June, Alec, and Paul, if he's still there, we've come to a very natural conclusion, bang on time. I think we need to deal with tariffs. We need to find ways to become more resilient, and we need to do that through services-led strategies. So let me just thank you all for taking the time to join us today. It's been great to have your insight from experience and time in industry from an economic and academic perspective, and from an SME perspective. So as always, thank you for your time and your insights. This has been recorded. We will share it with delegates that weren't able to join us today. And as always, Christina, thanks for making this happen. And good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.